Welcome back, history students, to another explainer. Let's just jump right in today because we are going over what has to be the single most legendary, how is this not a movie, comeback story in human history. We're looking at the 13th century tale of Sundiata Keita, the original real-life Lion King. Seriously, this is the incredible story of a boy who was born into a world that fully expected him to fail, a kid who spent his early years literally crawling in the dirt, only to rise up and build one of the greatest, wealthiest empires to ever exist. It sounds exactly like a Hollywood script, but this is real, documented West African history. And honestly, the reality is way more intense than any cartoon could ever be. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is the epic hero's journey we're about to follow. We'll start with the buffalo woman's prophecy, move to a prince in the dirt, witness the lion learns to walk, trace his years forged in exile, break down the Battle of Quirina, and finally explore the birth of an empire. So I want you to ask yourself, what is the absolute greatest underdog comeback story in human history? Because whatever you're thinking of right now, Sundiata's journey might just beat it. Imagine a boy born with literally every disadvantage, mocked by his own family, dragging himself on his stomach through the dust, who eventually rises up to forge a gold-plated African superpower. That's the sheer scale of the historical arc we're dealing with today.
Part 1. The Buffalo Woman's Prophecy, a Mystic's Vision.
To really understand the myth, we have to ground ourselves in the real historical stakes of the 13th century. Our story kicks off in a tiny kingdom called Kongaba, which was the small, remaining piece of the once mighty empire of Ghana. On one side, you have King Magan, the ruler of Kongaba. Good guy, fair leader, very well liked by his people. But he was incredibly vulnerable to his neighbor to the north. That neighbor was Sumero Kante, an absolute tyrant who was actively swallowing up the region, expanding his borders, and ruling through pure violence and fear. So Kongaba was living in the shadow of a very real, very terrifying threat. Right in the middle of all this tension, a mystic hunter from a foreign land visits King Magan. The king is naturally super anxious about the future of his kingdom, so he asks the mystic to read his fortune using ritual shells. The hunter scatters the shells, looks up at the king, and drops a cinematic bombshell. He says, "Your successor hasn't been born yet." Now, King Magan is incredibly confused by this. He already has a perfectly healthy son with his beautiful first wife, Sasuma, but the mystic insists that a completely different destiny is waiting for him. The hunter prophesies that two men will soon bring Magan a woman from far away. But here was the catch. The mystic said she would be, quote-unquote, hideous, with a huge hump on her back and highly unusual features. But the mystic insisted Magan absolutely had to marry her. Why? Because this buffalo woman was destined to be the mother of the mightiest king in history. A lion, so great his legacy would last forever. Magan is skeptical, obviously. But sure enough, days later, hunters arrive with a woman exactly as described named Sagalin. Believing the prophecy, the king actually marries her. Part 2. A Prince in the Dirt. Born into hardship. This is the abyss of our hero's journey, and it really highlights just how precarious ancient royal succession truly was. So Galan gives birth to a boy named Sundiata. King Magan is thrilled. He thinks, yes, the Lion King has arrived. But that excitement vanishes pretty fast. Instead of a mighty, roaring lion, Sundiata is born disabled. By age 3, when all the other kids are running around, the young prince can only crawl on his stomach, dragging his legs in the dirt. And to make it worse, the king's first wife, Sasuma, she is ruthless. She constantly brings her own healthy son out to play right in front of Sundiata, violently mocking him and his mother, laughing that she prefers a son who can walk over a lion that crawls like an animal. Despite his mother trying every herb and healer she can find, nothing works. By age 7, Sundiata still isn't walking. When King Magan is on his deathbed, he still holds on to that hunter's prophecy. His dying wish is for Sundiata to inherit the throne. But the politics of the era were brutal. His advisors flat out refuse. They completely betray his last wishes because they are terrified that a disabled king will make Kingaba look terribly weak to rival kingdoms, basically inviting a swift invasion. So they hand the throne directly to Sasuma's son instead. Part 3. The Lion Learns to Walk. Rising from the Dust. I want to slow down here for a second, because the physical weight and the historical gravity of this next moment is the turning point of this entire explainer. One day, Sokotalin is watching her 7-year-old son, the rightful heir to the throne, eating from a bowl on the ground, literally like a dog, because he cannot physically sit at a table.
The humiliation finally breaks her. She begins to sob uncontrollably. Sundiata looks up at his mother from the dirt, and he makes a powerful promise. Do not cry. I will show you today that I can walk. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer physical tension of what happens next. It is legendary. Sundiata crawls all the way to the village blacksmith and demands a heavy iron rod. A huge crowd gathers, including his tormentor, Sasuma. Sundiata grabs the iron rod, plants it straight down into the dirt, and begins to pull. He strains every single muscle, sweat is pouring down his face, and he's putting so much pressure on the rod that the solid metal actually begins to bend. Slowly, his shaking muscles pull him up to one knee. He keeps pushing against all the odds until he releases the rod and stands perfectly on his own 2 feet. The crowd absolutely erupts, shouting, "The lion walks!" It is an incredible, defining historical moment.
Part 4. Forged in Exile. Years of Wandering.
Sasuma realizes instantly that if Sundiata is walking, her son is going to lose that throne. Terrified, she plots his assassination, forcing Sundiata and his mother to flee into the night. But this 7-year exile wasn't just aimless wandering. Think of it like a gritty training montage. It was highly strategic military growth. He starts as a refugee, right? Bouncing from place to place, but the harsh conditions mold him. By year 4, he develops into a massive, powerful soldier. By year 6, his bravery in the kingdom of Mekama's army is so renowned that their king actually deems him the heir to their throne. But then, in year 7, merchants from his homeland arrive, falling to their knees. They bring devastating news. The tyrant Somoro has finally invaded Kangaba. Sasuma fled like a coward. Sundiata knows his destiny is calling, and he begins his march home.
Part 5. The Battle of Kurina. Clash of Titans. This is where the narrative completely shifts from a story of personal triumph to high-stakes historical empire building. You see, Sundiata didn't just march home alone with a sword. He returned as a brilliant diplomat. As he traveled back, he stopped at every single kingdom that had sheltered him during his exile. He warned their leaders, if you don't unite right now to stop Sumoro, this tyrant is going to swallow us all up, one by one. And his diplomacy worked. He successfully rallied the surrounding kingdoms, forging an unprecedented alliance. His army just grew larger and larger at every stop until a massive, unified force of warriors gathered to meet Sumoro's forces at the Battle of Kurina. History tells us this battle was an absolute bloodbath. But Sundiata's unmatched intensity and that built different leadership forged through years of hardship in the dirt proved to be way too much for the tyrant. Sumoro's forces were permanently crushed.
So the absolutely crucial point here is what happens in the immediate aftermath of this victory. The smaller kings who had fought alongside Sundiata were so incredibly impressed by his strength and his leadership that they willingly bowed down to him. They granted him the ultimate title, Mansa, that literally translates to King of Kings. He wasn't just ruling his hometown anymore. He was the undisputed leader of a massive new union.
Part 6. Earth of an Empire. The Rise of Mali. And this brilliantly illustrates how Sundiata's military victory directly paved the way for an economic boom that completely reshaped global history. He took a fractured, conquered land and turned it into a unified superpower. His regional alliances created vast, secure borders for the new Mali Empire. Within those borders, he consolidated control over huge gold mines, generating unprecedented wealth. He also secured control of the regional salt beds, which, back in the 13th century, was a vital and incredibly lucrative resource used for food preservation. Salt was basically as good as gold. To put that wealth into perspective, generations later, his descendant, Mansa Musa, would inherit all of this and expand upon it. Many historians still consider Mansa Musa to be the absolute richest human being to ever walk the earth. I mean, the guy was so incredibly wealthy that during a trip to Mecca, he handed out so much gold that he actually crashed the economy of Egypt for an entire decade. And all of that mind-blowing wealth tracks directly back to the empire Sundiata fought to build. So for you focused learners out there, why does a story from 800 years ago still matter to us today? Because Sundiata Keita is the ultimate historical proof that your starting point in the dirt does not determine your finish line. He took every single insult, every disadvantage, and used them as literal fuel to pull himself up. As the sources remind us, sometimes the lion just needs a little time to walk before he's ready to roar. That wraps up our explainer on the epic rise of the Mali Empire. But before we go, I want to turn it over to you. What do you think was the most intense part of Sundiata's story? Bending the iron rod, or using 7 years of exile to build a massive army? Also, what other epic comeback stories from history prove that true legends are simply built different? Let us know down in the comments. We are always looking to explore more hardcore, unlikely historical moments. Keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.